Dr. Christopher DiCarlo is with us. He's a fellow, advisor, and board member of the Society of Ontario Freethinkers and the Centre for Inquiry in Canada. He's also a past visiting research scholar in the Stone Age Laboratory at Harvard University. Dr. DiCarlo, I have the book, How to Become a Really Good Pain in the Ass, A Critical Thinker's Guide to Asking the Right Questions. I've read a bunch of it. I'm actually going to take it with me on a flight next week and hope to finish the whole thing. I'm fascinated by it because in the U.S., there's a lot of discussion about, are people thinking critically about so many different issues? Politics is kind of the obvious one, but then we also get into discussions of when religion comes into play, are people for some reason choosing not to think critically, or are they unable of critical thinking when they are clouded by some of the teachings of religion? Now, you're an atheist, and you also consider yourself a critical thinker. So I'm curious whether you think that both of those are linked in some kind of obvious way, or if they just happen to come together, religion and lack of critical thinking in some cases.
It can. It doesn't have to always be that way, but it does get in the way. And you see this with like Fox and Friends. You see it in a number of other cases where when people answer what I call the big five, the biggest questions we can ask about ourselves, and when they answer them supernaturally, you tend to think, well, okay, how do those answers trickle down and affect the way they answer other questions that deal with social policy and other political aspects of day-to-day life within any given population?
So you talk about the big five questions, and those are, what can I know? Why am I here? What am I? How should I behave? And what is to come of me? So these are questions that for a lot of people, the answers are in religion, many different religions around the world, but for many people, the answers there are in religion. Do you say that the answers to all five of those questions are based in science? What are they based in?
Well, in the book, what I do is I look at how people can answer them naturally or supernaturally, and then I just kind of put it out there and say, where do you fall with these answers? Do you try to reconcile the natural with the supernatural? Do you chuck out the supernatural? It's not an aspect of your life that you particularly need. Are you predominantly a supernaturalist, and you abide more by the teachings and words of specific texts and people and experiences and so on and so forth? The fact of the matter is, science has in many ways been not so much undermining religious answers to those questions, but certainly given us a lot of reasons to reconsider how they have been answered in the past and to what extent they're relevant today.
Is this more of a training issue? In other words, is it a matter of not being taught how to think critically about things? Is it a lack of aptitude? I mean, what is it really that you see in most people who are not exhibiting the type of critical thinking you outline in the book?
Right. Obviously, I'm somewhat biased in favor of critical thinking. I'll make no pretensions against that. But yeah, the fact of the matter is, when kids come to school in kindergarten grades 1 to 12, we assume they know how to think. But the fact of the matter is, there are rules for having discussions, for thinking, for making your case, presenting arguments. And when you violate some of these rules, we have the capacity, we have these tools that say, hey, wait a minute, hang on. No, you can't quite get away with that unless you do some more work here. And the fact of the matter is, when it comes to answering those big five in a supernatural way, what happens is that gets embroiled within a cultural context. And if it becomes, say, enshrined within some kind of religious dogma, then politically, a lot of people say, well, you know what, we have to respect that. It's their religious beliefs, and we speak in kind of hushed tones about these sorts of things. Now, I have no problem with constitutional rights for freedom of religion. Absolutely none. You can pray to flying squirrels for all I care. It doesn't matter to me. What matters is when those answers are put into actions and they affect the lives of other people who don't necessarily belong to the same club that answers the big five in that same way.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that there's is there a possible coexistence of both religion and critical thinking at the level you're talking about, or can they simply not exist together?
They can exist, but it is a delicate balancing act. And what has to happen is a basis of understanding that there's a difference between having belief in certain things and then taking into action what follows or is entailed, logically entailed by those beliefs. So it really comes down to what I call, it's in the book, the tolerance harm inverse proportion law. So you, me, everybody else, we can tolerate people's beliefs and people's actions, provided they're not generating harm or considerable harm or perceived harm to our species or other species. Once that level of harm starts to rise, then our level of tolerance then dips. And there's going to be an intersecting point where harm and tolerance are inversely proportionate. When harm rises, tolerance lowers. And it's at that intersecting point where we would say, as philosophers, as critical thinkers, I think we have a moral obligation now to say something about it and perhaps physically do something about it, where we disagree because harm is being generated by these views and these actions.
What areas in the U.S. specifically do you see that the tolerance seems to be too high for lack of critical thinking? Is it specifically on issues around politics? Is it around science and, of course, discussions of evolution versus intelligent design? I mean, where are you most concerned with it?
The two areas that I'm most concerned with and have been throughout my life, one costing me a job, was on human origins, discussions about human origins, and where science clearly demonstrates we are the descendants of African apes. A great many people have trouble with this because they perceive themselves to be specially created and that we are not on the same level as other primates. So that's why I've created this shirt. You know, back in 2005, I was fired for writing "We Are All African" on the board in a critical thinking class. And I said, now why would Darwin and others maintain that this is a true statement? And what reason would we have to doubt this? And I was taken to task by a couple of students, one Aboriginal and one Christian, who felt that my views offended their particular worldviews. Human origins is certainly a big one, and of course, homosexuality is another one. And the fact that I'm Canadian, so I have the privilege of looking down at Americans, of course, because we're perfect in every way. And when I see people like Michelle Bachmann and her husband, Marcus Bachmann, who's into things like reparative therapy for gay men, you know immediately that the way he has answered the big five supernaturally has now affected the way he acts in life and is affecting the lives of other people. So he's not just believing this stuff, he's acting on this stuff. My information that I've compiled over the years maintains fairly clearly that homosexuality is not a life choice, it's who you are. You were born that way. You're no different from any heterosexual person. So, in fact, sexuality is amoral. That is to say, you can't morally judge a person's sexuality since they don't choose it. They are simply born that way. Now, you can see how I've answered the big five and the way in which it trickles down and affects the way I see the world versus, say, a Dr. Marcus Bachmann and the way he sees the world. So now we put it on the table and say, okay, who's right? What are we using to measure correctness? What are we using to measure, you know, who has the better argument here and why?
Absolutely, and I wish we had more time, because the next question I want to get to is how might we, in your mind, move away from such a situation, particularly in the U.S., and I know you live in Canada, where so much of all politics and news and everything really is based around religion and often lack of critical thinking. The book is How to Become a Really Good Pain in the Ass. The author and our guest has been Dr. Christopher DiCarlo. It's been a pleasure, and would love to have you back.
Well, thank you very much.